and that goes forward. That's it.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Pensions Committee and Pensions Board. As Mr. Peary said, this is a hybrid meeting, meaning people are here in attendance in the Leicester Town Hall, and also members of the committee and board can connect online too, and we have some members online today. Except looking at the agenda, except continuing from agenda 10, all business items will exclude the press and the public, and at that point, as Mr. Peary says, we'll take a 10-minute comfort break. We have many new members here today, including myself. However, I'm sure we'll all learn and enjoy pension business, being guided by the expertise and professionalism from our officers, coupled with the experience from members on this committee and board. Not to forget the input from our advisors. So feel free to ask any questions or make comments. All questions are good. We ask to understand. Before we start, I think it would be nice if we all introduced ourselves. This is the first time we've had an in-person meeting for 3 years. So could we start round the table first? Maybe starting from my right-hand side, please.
Hello, yes, I'm Bruce Miller, a Chief Investment Officer of a Lothian Pension Fund and an advisor to the Joint Investment Strategy Panel.
Thank you.
Morning.
Good morning, I'm Douglas McNaughton and I'm the pensioners representative from the Falkirk section of the committee. Not the board, the committee. Right.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Jim Flynn from Falkirk Council.
Good morning, I'm Justina Bennett and I'm pension fund accountant.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Amanda Templeman. I'm the Chief Finance Officer for Falkirk Council and this is my first Pensions Committee on board, so I'm very much looking forward to it.
Good morning, my name's Catherine Carruthers and I'm the Pensions Manager for Falkirk Pension Fund.
Good morning, I'm Councillor Lorna Binney for Falkirk South and I'm Chair of the Pensions Committee. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Brian Perry. I'm Democratic Services Manager with Falkirk Council and clerk to the committee, or one of the clerks to the committee this morning.
Good morning, I'm Sophie Dick. I'm the Democratic Services graduate for Falkirk Council.
Good morning, Councillor David Aitchison from Falkirk Council.
Good morning, Sandy Harrower, United Steward, Clubmaster Council.
David Wilson, Collect Manager Unison Steward.
Tony Caleri, Member Rep on the board, currently Board Chair from Stirling Council.
Kirsty McGilvey, I'm Independent Advisor to Lothian, GISP and Falkirk.
I wonder, because everybody's screens will show different images, maybe I'll go around and just ask the people there to introduce themselves. So looking at my screen, George Murphy.
Yeah, hello, I'm George Murphy. I'm the Interim Chief Finance Officer at Stirling Council and also the Stirling Council Rep on the board.
Thank you. Councillor Steinbank.
Councillor Ewan Steinbank, Member on the board.
Thank you. Tonya?
I'm wondering if you can hear me. I don't think
can hear you fine. Can't see you, but we can hear you.
Right, because I've had a number of problems this morning, but thank you. I'm here in person.
You just introduce yourself though, Tonya.
Yes, I am the Committee Services Officer for this committee and clerking the meeting. Brian is assisting with a number of technical matters this morning. Thank you.
Councillor Sinclair.
Morning folks, I'm Councillor Ian Sinclair, Falkirk North Ward. Pleasure to be here.
Albert.
Good morning everyone, I'm Albert Chen. I'm a Portfolio Manager with Lothian Pension Fund.
Ed.
Morning everyone, Ed Morrison, Head of Finance and Resources with Scottish Children's Report Administration and Board Member.
Thank you, and last but not least, Councillor Quinn.
Hi, I'm Councillor Brian Quinn. I'm from Clackmannanshire, and I'm the representative on the committee from Clackmannanshire.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That was really, really helpful. Hopefully we'll remember all the names today, though. I'm now going to start the business formally now. Go to agenda item 1, which is apologies. Do you have any apologies, Mr. Peary?
I've got an apology from David Morgan from SEPA.
Thank you. We now move on to declarations of interest.
Sorry, I meant to pass this on. Andy Douglas asked me to pass his apologies on, so I almost forgot. Sorry.
Thank you.
Is that all the apologies then? Thank you. We'll now move on to declarations of interest. Members should declare any financial or non-financial interest they have in any item of business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Is that none? Thank you. We'll move on now to the minute of the joint meeting of Pensions Committee and Board that was held on the 17th of March 2022. Appreciate that not all members here today and online were actually at that meeting. It's pages 4 to 11. If I'll maybe give you a minute, maybe just to look at that before we agree it or not. Has everybody had long enough to look at it? Can we agree the minute? Is that yes? Agreed? Agreed, thank you. Now we move on to agenda item 4, which is rotation of chair of the board. I'm going to ask Catherine Carruthers, our pension fund manager, to take this report. Thank you.
So the chair of the board rotates between the employer and the employee representatives, member representatives, I should say, each year. The last employer chair of the board was Simon Hunt. He has left, and the current chair of the board is Tony Colery, and he is a member representative. So the chair of the board will rotate back to the employer side. The employers have got together beforehand because there is one of the employer representatives missing today, and they have nominated the missing member. So David Morgan has been nominated as the new chair of the board. Brian, is this a case where we give the board time to vote?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's a need to vote. I think just that, well, if the board are happy with that, the board members that are present are happy with that, that's fine. If they need a minute or two to maybe discuss, then we can accommodate that certainly. But I think some of the discussions happened already. So if you're happy to agree, then we just have to proceed. Yeah. I see nods.
Yep, happy to agree.
Nods are, so that's great. Thank you.
So the recommendations, the Pensions Committee and Pensions Board are asked to note this report, and the nomination has been agreed. Is that correct? Thank you. We're now going to move on to agenda item 5, which is the unaudited annual report and accounts. And this is Amanda. Chief Finance Officer will speak to this report.
Thank you, Convener. So the purpose of the report in front of you today is to ask the committee to consider the unaudited accounts. The accounts are subject to Local Authority Accounts Regulations 2014, and those regulations are prescriptive in terms of the timeframes for completion and consideration of the unaudited accounts. So those regulations state that the accounts must be submitted to the external auditor by the 30th of June. They must be published on the website from the day they're submitted. And a local authority or committee of that authority whose remit includes audit or governance functions must meet to consider the accounts by the 31st of August. So there's also a requirement to notify the public that the accounts are available for inspection, and that inspection period must last for 3 weeks. In our case, the inspection period was from the 30th of June to the 20th of July, and the public have the option to make an objection to the accounts, which they would lodge with the auditors, who in our case are EY. So at this stage, the pension fund's accounts have been submitted, published and advertised in accordance with the regulations. There were no objections made to the accounts, and this meeting fulfills the requirement for consideration of the unaudited accounts by the 31st of August. I'll just take the opportunity to highlight a few areas in the accounts. So firstly, as set out in paragraph 5.2 of the report, which is on page 22 of the agenda, and also set out in the actuarial overview within the accounts on page 51 of the agenda, the estimated funding level for the fund as at 31st of March was 113%. As noted in the actuarial update, this is a positive position, but we do need to exercise caution because it represents a point in time, and it's very dependent on the assumptions that are used. An example of that is shown on page 166 of the agenda, which is part of the funding update for Hymans, which has been appended to the accounts. And the chart at the bottom of that page 166 shows how the assumed future investment return impacts on funding levels, and that's just an example of those assumptions impacting on the funding level. The link between the funding level and the contributions is less clear cut. Contribution rates allow for a range of scenarios, and some of that will include high inflation. And so the high inflation pressures that we're facing doesn't automatically lead to higher contributions. However, there is upward pressure on the cost of future benefits because higher inflation means that members will receive higher increased benefits being earned and therefore paid. And you can see that in the chart on page 165 of the agenda, where the pink dotted line sets out the projected future benefit payments as at March 2020, and you can see that's compared to March 2022. And there's also the possibilities that benefits may increase in April 2023 at a level higher than assumed, and that could impact on our cash flows. So that's another area that we'll be keeping under review going forward. If I turn back to the covering reports, paragraph 5.3 of the report sets out the investment return information, and that highlights a return of 13.1% against a benchmark of 6.2%, and that provides reassurance that the fund's investment strategy has worked well, not just during 21-22, but in terms of that longer term performance as well. Moving on page 38 of the agenda, within the management commentary accounts, the risks, particularly around investment activity, are highlighted with the increasing risk due to the economic volatility and the conflict in Ukraine in particular being highlighted. Turning back to the cover report, paragraph 5.4 of the report on page 23 covers cash flow, and that's also set out in more detail in the accounts on page 56 and 57 of the agenda. In 21-22, the fund received a net positive cash flow of just under 15.5 million, with an increase in contributions to the fund due to salary increases and higher employer rates being levied. But as the ratio of deferred and pensioner members to active members increases, we would expect that positive cash flow position to reduce. And there's more information on member numbers on pages 63 and 64 of the agenda. Paragraphs 5.5 and 5.6 of the covering report summarise the contributions and the costs of the fund respectively, and there's much more commentary on the cost of the funds in particular on page 60 of the agenda. There's two statements which are on pages 110 and 111 of the agenda, and that's the pension fund account and the net assets statement respectively. These statements show the closing net assets as at 31st of March 2022 of 3.2 billion. The annual governance statement is on page 147 of this agenda, and the committee is also being asked to approve that document. And that document provides information on responsibilities and outlines some of the controls that are in place. So the governance statement seeks to provide some reassurance on the controls in place, and notes on page 150 the work of internal audit and the substantial assurance that was provided during 21-22. Further work on cyber attack related risk has also been undertaken, and the assessment of the fund's compliance against the principles in the SPPA best practice guidance is shown on pages 154 to 158 of the agenda. So at this stage, the audit process is underway. It's expected that the audited accounts will come to the next meeting of the committee in September. Those audited accounts will be accompanied by the external auditor's annual report, and our auditors, EY, will be at the committee to present their findings on the accounts. So I've got various colleagues here who will be able to assist, and we're all happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. That was a detailed report there. I personally just want to see on the back of that, and really pleased to see that the strong investment performance since March 2020, which has contributed in the increase of fund assets that outstrips the increase in liabilities. That is excellent. That's excellent for our members. Obviously, you have advised caution with that. I do appreciate that. But I'm happy, and I'm sure all the members will be happy with that as well. I'm now going to the recommendation. I'm going to open up for questions, but the Pensions Committee and Pension is asked to consider the comment on the unaudited annual report and accounts for 21-22 of the Falkirk Council Pension Fund. So I'm now going to open it up for comments. So we have somebody, it's Councillor.
I see Councillor Quinn's hands up, so maybe if we could go to Councillor Quinn first.
Councillor Quinn.
Thank you. I just have a quick question about the direct investment costs in 5.6. I was looking. I'm just new here, so I'm just wondering, does that cost include annual management charges, or are they kind of not included in direct investment costs?
The costs that we can see in a point 5.6, the 4.9 million are the costs that we are directly invoiced for. The fund also incurs other costs that come up from the capital, and if you look at this is further in the accounts in the note 11A.
Excellent, thank you.
Do we have any more questions or comments on this report at the moment? So there doesn't look as if there is any. So can the Pensions Committee, you're asked to approve the annual government statement. Can we approve it? Thank you. Thank you. I'm now moving on to item 6, the pension fund delegation, and item 6, the report will be read by Catherine Carruthers. Thank you.
So the scheme of delegation for the pension fund was last presented to the board and committee in June 2018, and with a large new intake, we thought it would be a good time to represent. You'll find it from page 172 on the agenda. So under the fund's governance model, the Pensions Committee is responsible for making all decisions that affect the fund. The board provides an oversight function. Under Section 6 of the Council Standing Orders, the Council has delegated pension fund business to the Pensions Committee. And this delegation includes agreeing investment beliefs and policies. And I do mean beliefs because we have a statement of responsible investment principles, and it's our approach to our environment, social governance matters. Well, we'll refer to that as ESG throughout the meeting. Also setting the investment strategy, including the asset allocation and benchmarks, setting fund policy, overseeing the fund administration, and approving the pension fund budget and the annual report and accounts. Just done the annual report and accounts, and I'm bringing a budget later on. Under Section 7 of the Council Standing Orders, the Chief Officers are empowered to take all operational decisions, except for those matters specifically reserved to Council or Committee, and provided that any such decisions are not inconsistent with Council policy. On all managerial and professional matters, incidental or ancillary to the discharge of the delegated funds. What does this mean? It means that the operational activities that are undertaken are done in the name of and with the authority of the Chief Finance Officer. The Chief Finance Officer's delegations include authorising scheme communications, such as the cover letter for our annual benefit statements, which are winging their way out to members, letting contracts, such as the contracts we have for our fund actuary, our pension administration software, authorising actions relating to statutory compliance, like the PAYE for our pensioners that we pay the tax over to HMRC on a monthly basis, agreeing employer cessation arrangements, payment of death grants as and when they arise, and the implementation of the investment strategy. Noting further back that it's the committee, with regard for advice that's given by the Joint Investment Strategy Panel, that make the actual investment strategy. The final delegation that happens is from the Chief Finance Officer to the pension section, such as the calculation and award of benefits from the scheme.
Thank you, Catherine. That was really interesting. It helps us to understand more about the delegation within the pension fund. I'm now going to open it up. Has anybody got any comments on this report? None? None. So the recommendation is the Pensions Committee and Board are asked to note the contents of this report. Thank you. We're moving on now to agenda item 7, which is general governance matters, and this will be Catherine again that will take this report. Thank you.
Okay, so this is kind of like a roundup of everything that doesn't fit into another paper. And I'm going to start with the cost cap, because that's actually quite a hot potato at the moment, because the unions are in court arguing over the results of the cost cap. And so I want you to understand what that actually means. So when the public service pension schemes were reformed in 2015 to move from final salary arrangements to CARE, which is career average revalued earnings, the cost to employers for providing the pension that we have under the LGPS were fixed. So they fixed it at a cost of 15.2%. You might say we pay 22.5%. On average in our fund. It's not the same kind of calculation, it's different calculations, and this one's purely looking at costs rather than the actual individual fund. So it's a more holistic approach. And the reason they set this cost was to ensure that public service pension schemes remained affordable in the long term. This new CARE scheme is designed to last for 25 years, which is what they said back in 2015. But to do that, they had to kind of set this cost, and then they said, well, basically, we're going to have a corridor. We're going to have plus 2%, minus 2%. And if the costs move by more than that 2%, if it goes 2% higher, we'll bring down benefits to reduce that cost. If the costs go down by 2%, then they're going to increase benefits or reduce employee contributions because members are paying more than they're actually getting. So there's that swing. The latest valuation showed that the cost was 15.4%. It was heavily delayed because there is litigation over the way we moved from final salary to career average, and that centred on a protection that was given to older members. We will discuss this next in the Mcleod remedy section, so I won't go too much into that. But we ended up with a 15.4% for that. So there's no change because that's only 0.2%. So there's no change to the benefits or the contributions in the scheme. The initial results of the cost cap actually gave government a surprise because initially it showed that we had dropped by more than 2%. So there needed to be an adjustment to benefits and contributions. It wasn't expected that the cost cap would kick in on its first outing, so there was a review, as government does, and they reviewed the cost cap. And what they discovered was that the reason why the scheme was coming in lower was because the legacy final salary benefits were creating the saving. The care benefits weren't. And it seemed a bit of a perverse outcome that you would improve care benefits because final salary benefits had got cheaper. So they have reviewed the cost cap mechanism, and going forward, and this should apply to the next valuation that's done on the cost cap, they're only going to look at the reformed scheme. So the mechanism only considers past and future service in the reformed schemes, and costs related to the legacy schemes will not be considered. They're going to also widen the cost control corridor from 2% to 3%. So in some respects, you can say, well, that's not so great for members because, you know, if it had gone to less, you know, minus 2.5, we would have got a benefit enhancement. But on the flip side, it is good because if benefits had increased by 2.5%, we would have had a reduction. So that's not going to happen now because it's 3% that it kicks in. So it's a kind of win-lose situation, but it'll balance. And the final thing they're going to do is introduce an economic check. For Mcleod, this is mostly information at this stage, but it will lead to activity and decision-making further down the line. Mcleod is also known variously as Sergeant and others or Erin and others. Sergeant being the firefighter, Erin and others being the police. When we moved to the care scheme, if you were within 10 years of retirement, we basically said, we'll give you the better of the old and the new. But if you're not, you're going new. And for some schemes like the police and fire and the judiciary, who is Mcleod, that meant the younger members were being put into what they saw as an inferior scheme because there were a lower rate of build-up of pension. The government tried to defend that strongly, long and hard, and lost. It is age discriminatory. So we need to put in a fix. In the LGPS, it's not quite so bad as in the other schemes where they literally closed their old scheme and threw them all into a new scheme. So their situation is much worse. We kept everybody in the same scheme. So we're just looking at what we call the statutory underpin. It's that underpinning, that promise you won't get less than you would have got had you remained in the old scheme. It will create a lot of extra admin, and we need to do those comparisons for anybody who's affected. And the people who are affected are those who would have been eligible had it not been for their age. And we need to do that review. We need to collect some data. We need to put that in the system, and that's what you need to be aware of. But as you also know, we announced earlier in the year a potential merger with Lothian. So we are doing work towards getting that remedy, but how we actually do the work will be subject to the actual final decisions about whether we merge, because it would likely be the merged entity that does the remedial work. So we have that there. Similarly, for the pensions dashboard, this is a government initiative where everybody will be able to log on to a dashboard and see all of their pensions in one place. We need to be able to connect to that dashboard. I believe the ISP providers are now in place. At the last meeting back in March, there were no ISP providers. There were people who wanted to be, but we didn't actually have any. Our pension administration software provider is an ISP provider, or will be an ISP provider, and they are the providers that will enable us to connect to the dashboard. Again, part of the dashboard is like having good quality data. So we are working on our data to make us dashboard ready. We have to connect September 2024. That is our deadline. We can connect earlier, but again, it's around making sure our data is in a position whereby we are happy that people can go on and see their benefits real time and accurate. We also have some training events for committee and board members. We have one that's done by the Pension Officer Group for Scotland. That will be coming up before the end of the year. I don't have a fixed date for that as yet. And what I do have fixed dates for are the Fundamentals course, which is run by the Local Government Association, which is the equivalent of COSLA, but in England. We use the Local Government Association for a secretariat service for the local government pension scheme in Great Britain. Northern Ireland don't sit in it, but we use the LGA, Local Government Association, for a secretariat service. So they have trained pension advisors who run these courses. It's a 3-day course online, 9:30 to 4 o'clock. There will be breaks. I know, Carl, there will be breaks. There's also the LGPS Governance Conference for 2023 taking place on the 19th and 20th of January in the Cardiff Marriott Hotel. I will not tell you what happened to me at Cardiff the last time I went to the Marriott Hotel. It involved a seagull, so I'm traumatized for life. But if anybody wants to go, if they could let me know, drop me an email, that would be great, and we can look at organising that. I've also put on here about the Pension Lifetime Savings Association, their Cyber Risk Made Simple guide, and that explains the nature of cyber threats for pension schemes and sets out 15 actions that pension schemes may wish to take as a result. As Amanda mentioned earlier, cybersecurity was one of the key focus areas for our internal audit during 21-22, and that will be reported back to committee and board in our September meeting. And you'll be glad to hear this, the final wrap up, Dominic Harris looks set to become the next pension ombudsman, taking over from the current ombudsman Anthony Arter. And the National LGPS framework has launched the Pension Administration Operational Support Services Framework, and I have to read that, which is actually good news for us because that is a framework we may or may not want to draw from when we're looking at remediation for Mcleod and the pensions dashboard. That's me.
Thanks very much, Catherine. That was a detailed report and there was a lot of information in that. One thing I want to mention, I think the dashboard is absolutely excellent. I mean, a lot of people, a lot younger people in the past, including myself, you haven't really been too interested in your pension, much money's there. And especially with the government changing the state pension age all the time. And it's good for people to know how much money's in the pot, etc. So, and obviously they can plan for the future in real time and it's accurate. That's excellent. The recommendation that the Pensions Committee and Board is asked to note the contents And I'm now going to open it up if anybody's got any comments on this report. Thank you. No comments? So we just...
It's a sign of a good report.
Pardon?
It's a sign of a good report.
It's a sign of a good report. So I've noted the comments. Thank you. Going to move on now to the agenda item 8, which is the market review and fund manager performance. And that will be Mr. Bruce Miller will take that report. Thank you.
I think Albert is going to take it actually. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, thanks very much, Bruce. Good morning, everyone. So agenda item 8, this paper presents things in a few sections. So there are revisions to the Statement of Investment Principles for the committee's approval, an update on recent investment market developments, an update on the fund's strategic allocation and performance, and an update on monitoring activity for the fund's investment mandates. So just starting first with the revisions to the Statement of Investment Principles. Those of you that were able to attend the recent training will have had a recent introduction to the SIP for short, but just as a refresher for everyone, the SIP is an important part of the fund's governance arrangements. It's a formal governance document, and it provides the framework within which the committee delegates implementation of investment strategy. It sets out the investment objectives of the fund and also the high-level principles around which those investments are invested. In terms of the changes to the document, they're mostly immaterial. The document needs to be reviewed under best practice at least once a year, and more regularly if there are any material changes to the strategy or to the arrangements. As I said, the changes are mostly immaterial. The main change to the document is set out in Appendix C, which changes the fund's statement of compliance with the UK Stewardship Code to a stewardship statement. So previously, for compliance with the UK Stewardship Code, it was really just a matter of submitting a statement. They've recently changed the process in order to be a signatory. That process has a very heavy reporting and administrative burden to it. So it now requires applicants to become a signatory. Given the cost involved and the resource involved, Falkirk has not made an application. However, it remains supportive of the code and the revised and expanded principles. And this is evidenced by the fund's stewardship activities, including its engagement with both Hermes and LAPFF in terms of its engagement activities. So that was what I was going to say on the SIP. Now turning to the market review and outlook, this is really just additional detail on the investment update that Amanda touched on in the annual report. The performance for the quarter to end of March 2022 was very volatile. There was a 3% decline for global equities in sterling terms, and more recently that's been followed by an almost 9% decline in global equities in the second quarter. Equity markets have entered bear market territory, over 20% down from their highs. Having said that, following the end of Q2, markets have recovered somewhat, but the situation remains highly volatile. The other thing to note is that bonds experienced their worst sell-off in over 40 years. They fell by double-digit percentages in both quarters, as many of you will know, as inflation has accelerated to the highest rate in 40 years. Central banks have been raising interest rates, and when rates rise, that negatively impacts the value of bonds. Looking now to fund strategy on page 214 of the papers, table 1 there sets out Falkirk's long-term investment strategy. That was agreed by the committee in June 2021. That remains unchanged. And in the table 2, under section paragraph 5.3, that shows the evolution of the fund's allocation relative to its target over the past 12 months to the 31st of March. A more recent picture of the fund's allocations relative to policy group is shown in table 3, and that position is taken as at the 29th of July, at the end of July. And you can see in the very right-hand side the position of all the fund's mandates and percentages, but also more importantly, the policy group weights at the very right-hand side under actual, and actual minus strategy shows the position relative to the long-term targets. So for equities, you can see a minor overweight by about 1%. That's offset by a minus 1% underweight to real assets, 19% to 20%, and then underweights of minus 2.6% to non-gilt debt, minus 4% to LDI, offset by an overweight to cash of 5%. In terms of the fund returns for the quarter, which we've reported on to the end of March, as we didn't have the performance for Q2 22 at the time of writing, the total fund returned just shy of minus 1% over Q1, well ahead of the benchmark return of minus 5%. We've noted here in the report that you are required as a committee to review fund performance on a quarterly basis. However, it's important to note that we should consider really the long-term returns of the fund, and these are shown in the table in Appendix 1. Over the 3-year and 5-year periods, the fund has done well in absolute terms. Over 3 years, 9% relative to the benchmark of 9.1. Over 5 years, a return of 7.7 relative to the benchmark return of 7.2%, and strong returns since inception. So that was all I was going to say in terms of the paper. I'm happy to take any questions or any further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chen, and it's very good to get all these updates on and with the performance of the fund as well. I'm just going to open it up for the recommendations. Is the committee and board invited to note the revised SIP? The committee is asked to approve the revised SIP and to note the recent investment market developments provided by Mr. Chen, the fund's strategic allocation and the fund's performance for the period ending 31st of March 2022, and the investment monitoring activity of the, actually I hate acronyms, JISP, so I would need to check that out. Joint Investment Strategy Panel, that's it. Maybe I can ask for the, the full name to go in there instead of acronyms. But then I will open it up. If anybody's got any comments, that would be really helpful at the moment. If not, we could agree the recommendations.
Councillor Sinclair.
Oh, Councillor Sinclair, I beg your pardon.
Hi, thanks, convener. I just wanted to clarify something, that the change in the SIP between the statement of compliance and the stewardship statement. Oh, I need to get my mouth around that one. Does that change anything primarily about the fund and about the operation of the fund at all, or it was just to clarify in my own mind? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sinclair. Mr. Chen, could you answer that?
Sure. Yes, it doesn't change anything about the operation of the fund, no.
Thank you, Councillor Sinclair. Thank you, Mr. Chen. Any more comments or questions? Do we agree with the recommendations? Thank you.
Agreed.
We now move on to agenda item 10, which is actually exclusion of the public. So I'm just going to take this moment to have a vote engagement and voting. Oh, beg your pardon. I've skipped an agenda item. It's agenda item 9, and it's engagement and voting activity. And Catherine Colours will take the report.
Okay, so one of the things that the fund does constantly is review its exposure to new and emerging risks that may affect the scheme. And they put in place internal controls to manage the risks identified. And this paper addresses the financial and reputational risks for the fund arising from our ESG issues, again, environment, social and governance issues that the pension committee have previously identified. The paper also addresses how the fund uses its shareholder power to invest responsibly. To manage the identified risks and to support its responsible investment ambitions, the committee appointed a dedicated engagement specialist, which, as Albert introduced to us, is Hermes EOS. I'll just refer to it as Hermes. And they have been appointed for a 4-year period, and we're actually coming towards the end of the first year. Under the contract terms, Hermes provide reports each quarter covering the themes of voting and engagement. 3 reports in particular: a voting report, an engagement report, and a public engagement report. The voting report does as it says. It shows us the number of votable meetings that were held in the quarter. The engagement report shows the split of engagements by region and theme, so it's quite high level. And then the public engagement report gives us the details of what's happened, what the engagements are. That public engagement report is public, but there's then a further highlights one, which is not a public document. That's been uploaded to the ShareFile portal and is available for you to read and review. But what I would ask the committee and board is that you treat that report as confidential. Engagement works because you build trust between the companies so that they know their reputations aren't going to be put at risk. In addition to these quarterly reports, Hermes will also provide an annual report containing case studies and public policy comment, as well as a client advisory council twice a year to help Hermes take client feedback. Hermes also have a website, the link is in the report, including the Hermes Public Engagement Plan, their responsible ownership principles, as well as blogs and podcasts on areas of interest will be found on that website. So I've left on section 3, which was from the last committee's report, because I know there's new members here. I didn't plan to go through it. Sorry, section 4. Section 4 is the one I've left on from the previous committee meeting. Didn't plan to go through that again. And what I am interested in knowing is whether you want that left on as a standing item to, along with the links to the library for future reference for future committees. But that's not necessarily on the committee, the recommendation part, sorry.
Yeah.
That's just me seeking some feedback, because this is your report and I want to make sure it works for you. So.
Thank you, Catherine. So the recommendations is the Pensions Committee and Pensions Board are invited to note and comment on the contents of this report and the reports provided by Hermes EOS. And you were saying, Catherine, that these reports will be on this agenda all the time.
So the voting and engagement is a standing paper. It's whether the contents in section 4 and section 3.5, this is my particular ask, if you would like those to remain for reference for you. The 3.5 points you to where the library is for Hermes, so your reference point, and section 4 outlines Hermes' approach to how they do the voting and engagement for us.
Thank you, Catherine. I believe we've got a comment from Councillor Steinbank.
Yeah, thank you very much. And sorry, I've not got my camera on. A few bandwidth problems at my house at the moment. I'd be happy for that to be kept on because I found it quite helpful, especially in preparation of this meeting as a new member of the committee, just so that we can understand the sort of approach being taken, because I think that allows us to comprehend, I think, a few of the other things within the report. I don't think it'll necessarily be necessary after a year or so, but I definitely found it helpful in the lead up to this meeting.
Helpful. I'm totally in agreement of that as well. I've got another question from Councillor Aitchison.
No, it's not quite. It's just I'm totally in agreement
Totally
for it
in
to be left
agreement.
in as well. I think it's a good point of reference for the time being anyway. Yeah.
Councillor Quinn.
Hello. Yeah, I agree with what other people have said about leaving it in. I just have a quick question. I'm not sure if this is the place to ask it, but it's just about the engagement generally. I mean, I looked for all the reports, and yeah, they tell us about all the, you know, what they voted on and all this kind of nice stuff. But I'm interested in results because we're spending £80,000 a year on this. If I've read the number correctly, you know, it's all well and good us voting and try to, you know, change a director here and there and change a policy here and there, but are we actually reducing the ESG risk of the companies that we're engaging with, and what are we measuring to assess that? Because otherwise we're just throwing money away for, you know, make ourselves feel better and no benefit at all.
Can you answer that, Catherine?
So I'll try. So on the engagement reports, you are given real life examples of how they are trying to change things. And there are some examples in there where there are action points that have been taken away by the companies. There's also an annual report, which contains case studies and public policy comment, which I've not seen yet, but I'm hoping would answer part of the questions you're raising, Councillor Quinn.
Does that help? Does that help,
Yeah. No, yeah, that is helpful. Yeah, and just kind of a wee bit of a follow-up. And, you know, obviously you're saying that sometimes, well, you know, sometimes things happen, but it's like in terms of our risk, I mean, what's our kind of cut-off? You know, if we are trying to engage in order to change the companies to reduce our, particularly like related to ESG risk, and reduce the, you know, and then obviously our potential returns. Why? When is enough engagement? You know, if companies have been engaged with for the last decade or more, or you know, and we're spending money to do this, and they're not improving, it's like when, you know, when do we say enough's enough? And what are we measuring from our point of view, not from Hermes' point of view? What are we measuring in terms of success for engagement? Do we have do we have any kind of goals or any kind of performance we're looking for with the companies that we're involved with that we want them to improve on, and we want to see improvement before we kind of give up on them? Or do we just do the engagement and then just kind of leave it? Sorry, it's a bit of a long question.
Thank you, Councillor Quinn. Mr. Bruce Miller will answer this question for you.
Yes, I'll answer it reasonably briefly, hopefully. You know, Falkirk signs up to the Hermes EOS approach to engagement, as Lothian do and have done for several years also. And they do have objectives and they do have milestones, and they do recognise that sometimes they won't get anywhere with a specific company. You know, for the funds and the funds managers, that becomes a question of when, you know, do they want to continue to hold the investment, and that will depend on an assessment of the financial risk, presumably of the holding. So yes, there are pretty clear objectives. Engagement is quite a long process. It doesn't happen in one meeting, so it is measured over a considerable period of time, but there are definitely objectives and goals. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
Does that answer the question? Yeah.
Miller. Councillor Quinn, does that help again?
Yeah, I mean, it helps a bit. Is there anywhere where we have that information about kind of what our objectives are or anything like that available?
Yeah, you will find those in some of the reports, and I think what we've done in the past is that Hermes EOS have come along to a committee meeting or a committee training session, and I think you'd probably find that quite valuable to hear from Hermes directly, and they can give you an awful lot of detail that we can't go into today. Yeah.
No, magic. No, thanks very much for that. That's helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Thank you, Councillor Quinn. I believe we have another question from Mr. Cleary. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you. Not a councillor, just
Sorry,
a member, but thank you for the promotion. No, my question is, Catherine mentioned Hermes coming back and talking to us every 6 months. Yeah, did I pick you up wrong? They kind of come back and ask and see what our drive is and where we are going.
I don't know that they've committed to coming back every 6 months, but we could, look for them to come back. We could approach them for September, definitely.
The only thing I'm thinking is from a kind of ESG perspective, things change rapidly and quickly, and I think we maybe need to have that engagement pretty regularly to keep up to date. So I think that's important. But I would also be interested to understand who would they actually engage with. Would it be purely the officer side? Would it be purely the committee? Would it be the board, the committee, the officers? Because I think everybody's got a view on where we need to run with this. So I'm just putting that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cleary. Is Mr. Miller, would you like to come in there?
Yes, I mean they're engaging generally with the officers, but they're also engaging with the committees. I say they will come along and see. And as you say, I'm not sure that the commitment's every 6 months, but they will come and visit. And I certainly would see them every 6 months or more often, just from a monitoring process of what they're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. So they do come in every 6 months then? Do they come in to give a report and updates?
As you say, there are various points of contact. One of them is the client advisory meeting that they have every year. And this is where they collate the important issues that funds want to look into. Now, Falkirk and Lothian are just one of many funds, so they have to go in the priorities not of Falkirk or not of Lothian, but of all the funds. So they do have a kind of prioritization. But I mean they are. They have funds from both the UK and Canada and so on, and I think I've forgotten what the number is now. But they basically speak for assets of maybe $1 trillion. It's probably on their website what the number is now. It keeps going up, and the more funds they get, the bigger the voice they have, and the more impact they have when they go and see a company and try and influence behaviour in that company and improve behaviour in that company, corporate behaviour in that company. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Sorry,
can I just say thanks for that? That's very, very comprehensive. But my final point on this one is I agree that to Catherine that item 4 should be in. It's a good refresher and a good reminder. But maybe drag 3.5 into it, so it's just part of the one thing. I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's quarterly reports are contains that. Which one is it? And yeah, so it's their approach. It's their approach. Yeah. Thank you. So are we all agreed to note the contents of this report and the reports provided by Hermes EOS? Agreed? Agreed. That's good. Thank you. So now we're going to take a short break now.
Sorry, if you just agree that first. Formally agree to exclusion.
We're going to agenda item 10. So do we agree exclusion of the public? Thank you. So we're now going to have a wee short comfort break for 10 minutes before we set up for the next session. Thank you.